me for my voice, but I have never seen anything like it.
Do you believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
Welcome back to the show. Host is always Andrew Zimmel. We only really have one big sports topic to talk about going into your Friday. Good Friday, we only have one topic to talk about, and if you're a Houston Texan fan, it's not good. It starts and ends with Bill O'Brien. We had Jake Asman come on the show earlier this week to talk to us about Houston sports. He does his national show out of Houston. He's in the Texans' backyard, so it only made sense for me to ask him some questions about Bill O'Brien. He broke it down very well for you guys. He said, listen, it might confuse people outside of Houston, might confuse people outside of Texas. How a guy as an incompetent head coach as Bill O'Brien has been for the Texans, how he has all the power in the organization. Many fans around the country might not know Bill O'Brien, head coach of the Houston Texans, also GM of the Houston Texans. Let me tell you something. If you worked in sales and your manager was you, if you pick up the phone one time that day or 100 times that day, you probably have pretty good job security. If you're your own boss, you have pretty good job security. And as Jake mentioned earlier this week, he said that, look, the owner of the Texans doesn't really care that much if they win or lose. Sure, the team wins 9, 10, 11 games. It's great. But if the Texans are 8-8, 7-9, 6-10, it's no skin off his nose. The money prints itself. It is hard to find a major sports team that loses money. The Texans don't do that. So when you look at this trade that they made earlier this week, they trade for Brandon Cooks. You might remember him winning a Super Bowl with the New England Patriots. You might remember him playing with the Los Angeles Rams. The Texans will send a 2020, so this current draft pick, the 57th overall to the Rams for Cook and a 2022 fourth-round pick. This is coming off the tails of signing Randall Cobb. So you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, they're giving Deshaun some weapons. They haven't signed Tunsil yet, but they're giving Deshaun some weapons to throw to. But here's where the problem lies. Before they traded for Cooks, before they signed Cobb, they traded away arguably the best wide receiver in the National Football League. You get rid of a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, you're pretty much chopping off your foot to save your hand at that point. It doesn't make sense why they got rid of Hopkins. You could cut this cake 1,000 different ways, but I'll tell you what, you can't eat it. No Texans fan is sitting here today getting cooked and thinking to themselves, our team is better than they were when they had a 24-0 lead in the second round of the playoffs. When the Texans had their foot on the throat of the Chiefs and couldn't get the job done, I promise you, fans around Houston, fans around the great state of Texas weren't thinking to themselves, you know what the problem is? The problem is that our wide receiver is not good enough. Hopkins isn't doing enough for us. We need to make a trade. Let me tell you something. We've been doing, if you listen to the show before, we've been talking to you about the NFL draft since Joe Burrow lifted up the national championship. We've been saying since late January that this draft was chock full of wide receiver talent. And I'll tell you what, on the offensive side of the ball, the running back position is pretty full too. So if you're the Texans, sure, you don't have the picks in the first round that you might want. And sure, in past drafts, you might have struggled a little bit judging talent. But this year, the NFL draft's a little bit different. Teams aren't getting those physicals. They're not getting the face-to-face meetings that they once had. If anything, this is the year that Bill O'Brien might fall into something. But instead of doing what teams like the Patriots, teams like the Chiefs, teams like the Ravens would do, you sit back, you let the game play itself, and then you step in and you can control what you can control. You have control of your draft picks. You have control of the players under contract. What you don't have control over is the trades that you can make with other teams. You cannot control what you're going to get back for these trades. Okay? You're only going to get back what these teams want to give you. And let me tell you another thing about Bill O'Brien. And this is why this Cooks deal makes me so sick. Is because this Hopkins trade is highway robbery. All right, we've been talking about it for a while now, but I have to reiterate that getting back David Johnson, a running back who was washed up 3 years ago, getting a guy who plays the position of running back, who everybody in the country has agreed the running back position's a dime a dozen. There's only 2 running backs in the league currently that you're willing to pay. It's Saquon Barkley in New York, who can take an entire offense and put it on his back. Doesn't have an offensive line, doesn't have a quarterback, has no wide receiver threats. He's carrying that offense. And a guy like Ezekiel Elliott, who had a down year this year, but for the most part has shown to be a productive running back. David Johnson is not either one of those names. So trading a top 1, top 2 wide receiver in the National Football League doesn't make sense. It's a head scratcher. So when the Texans make a trade like this, where they bring in a wide receiver whose best days, let's be honest, are kind of behind him. You look at the numbers Cooks has put up in the 2 seasons with the Rams, he's only caught 122 passes and 7 touchdowns. Let me tell you something about DeAndre Hopkins. Hopkins is catching 7 touchdown passes if you put Johnny Manziel under center. You put Tim Tebow under center. Hopkins can find a way to get 7 touchdown passes. And Cooks did it in 2 years. So, the Texans are in a position now where they have a head coach, have a GM wearing the same hat, have an owner who's asleep behind the wheel, and let's be honest here. The Texans fans, if you don't live in Houston, you're a Texans fan living anywhere else in the country, you already have a steep hill to climb. Dallas is America's team. Every single state has an NFL team that's pretty much taking over control of the territory. Okay? You can't, blow your nose without having an NFL team logo somewhere in a grocery store, in a gas station. NFL is everywhere. So if you're a Texans fan outside of Houston, you already have an uphill battle. You're already fighting against the fan base that you are around the most. In the state, Texans fans have to deal with Cowboys fans. Cowboys fans haven't won anything. But even with Jerry Jones running the show over there, that carnival has fewer clowns. All right? So you got to look at the root of the problem. And like Jake Asman said, Bill O'Brien's not going anywhere. So what can you do? You got to look at silver linings here. The only silver lining out of this entire thing is that even though DeAndre Hopkins is gone, even though Deshaun Watson still does not have an offensive line that you can really protect yourself with, even though you overpaid Randall Cobb, this is still a team that lives in the AFC South, a division historically very up and down. Historically, you look at it and you say to yourself, there's 4 teams any year that can win this division. The Titans have Ryan Tannehill. They got Derrick Henry. Mike Vrabel's an incredible coach, one of the up-and-comers. Good defense. Yeah, I could see them winning it. Look at the Colts. They got Phillip Rivers. They were a quarterback away last year. I could see them making some noise. You look at the Jaguars. They got a good defense. I'm not incredibly impressed by the quarterback position, but if things fall the right way, they could do it. And then you got the Texans, who on the back of Deshaun Watson is going to carry them. This team will only go as far as Deshaun can take them. And what's interesting, and I don't want to panic any Texans fans just yet, because this is a few years away. But what happens if this quarterback draft isn't as good as we think it is? What happens if Tua is a little bit more banged up? What happens if Jordan Love isn't what we think he could be? What if Justin Herbert doesn't pan out? What if Joe Burrow isn't what we think he is? And in 2 years, Deshaun Watson could be a free agent. Watson could leave for nothing. Now, I don't think that would happen. I think the franchise tag is put in place for those type of situations. I think the Texans would have to be completely crazy out of their mind to let a talent like that walk out the door. But I remind you, they just traded the best wide receiver in football. So this isn't a normal mom and pop shop we're working with here. This isn't a organization who is run correctly from top to bottom. This is the Houston Texans. And if I'll say this, and then I'll let you guys go. We'll wrap this podcast up. But I wanted to say this last thing about the Texans. Is that the Texans, historically, we're not talking about the Oilers. We're talking about the Houston Texans. Almost 20 years in the city. Historically, they are not a successful franchise. Historically, they're a basement dweller. All right, think about the times that they've made it out of the second round. Think about the times they've made it out into the second round, I should say. Kind of fluky. They beat a third-string quarterback. They blow a 24-point lead. I am just saying that if you're a Texans fan, this Cooks trade, I don't care how good you think that he could be. I think that his best years are behind him. I think that there is a world where the Houston Texans are 6-10, and Bill O'Brien is still the quarterback in 2025. I think that's a real possibility. All right, that's going to do it for the show. We had Alexander Haynes come on to talk to us about the coronavirus. We talked to Brady McBride, future D1 quarterback for the Texas State Bobcats. If you're not a Texas State Bobcat fan, then we have Jake Asman talking to us about all things COVID-19 and sports related. What is it doing to the radio industry? What is it doing to sports in general? We joked around and said that Fight Island could be a thing for UFC. Essentially, when we hung up the phone, literally hours later, they announced that UFC 249 was going to not happen. So it doesn't look like we are going to get Fight Island. I'm very disappointed in that. It is the conception of Mortal Kombat, though. I will say that. Anytime anybody says we're going to have all of these super athletes on an island, the hairs on my arm raises just a little bit, because that is the premise of a scary movie. I will say that. That's going to do it for the show. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Please continue to stay safe, and hopefully you guys have a good weekend.